Hello, YouTubers, friends, and compatriots. Look yourself, Desolate Servants, Peasants, Vassals, Minions. I'm a useful idiot, and welcome. Today I want to talk about the Ukraine once more, and as promised, I want to talk about the struggle that's going on between the oligarchs, or the wealthy elites in the Ukraine. That's a whole other spectrum of these struggles, and this should be no surprise. Oligarchs are having to go through these same kind of gyrations in country after country. And for example, with all the civil war and bloodbath going on in Syria, there's also a lot of activity going on with the elites in Syria. Some probably in the Assad circles who are negotiating with the West as we speak through secret channels. But here we have in the Ukraine, we have the street battles going on, but we also have the business elites, the oligarchs, as they refer to them. And this is always a component of these struggles. And in a lot of ways, what happens at this level is actually more important than what happens in the street. We have corporate interests and political interests and people who are highly placed, who control vast sectors of the Ukrainian economy that have a lot at stake. Some of them have a lot at stake staying closer ties with Russia. Some of them have a higher stake in creating better ties with the Eurozone. So let's get right to it. So we have the business class is divided just like the populace. In many ways, the more important battles going on here. The Russian, European affinities and ties as in most other post-Soviet countries. And we have the combination of old family wealth competing against the nouveau riche who are making their money basically dealing with Russia. So Ukraine's rich have capitalized on the flawed privatization of state assets and have created financial empires dominating media, banking, telecommunications, steel, coal, and heavy industry. And this is a really interesting part of the story to me because we've seen this happen in Russia as well, but all the other ex-Soviet states and states that were in Soviet influence, and that certainly includes the Ukraine. So what they did is when all these old communist countries, everything was state-owned. So once it was privatized, of course, the country's elites, the country's wealthy, were well-placed to buy up all these old state assets and reap the rewards. And so an interesting phenomenon. So like I say, in the Ukraine, they've been able to have a handful of people that control financial empires, including media, banking, telecommunications, steel, coal, and heavy industry. And needless to say, these oligarchs have tremendous political influence. Now, in Russia, they've weeded the oligarchs out of the Russian political system for the most part. But in Ukraine, they have a lot of influence. And in fact, entire factions in parliament are segregated by their affinity to different business leaders. And in fact, some of the billionaire elites are members of parliament. And so old Ukrainian families want to gravitate west, while the new rich enjoy the ties with Russia. So right now there's a lot of economic pressure as well. Needless to say, this entire disruption and all these protests have thrown the Ukraine economy out of whack, and they need $18 billion of liquidity infusion this coming March, or risk possible default. And that's a lot of what all the wheeling and dealing that's going on with the IMF and the Eurozone and Russia in the United States. There's a lot of this drama is being played out. Who's going to show the money? Show me the money. So to give you an idea of who these oligarchs are, so on one side we have Petro Poroshenko, and he's worth $1.6 billion. And he sees being connected to Europe would ensure protection of property rights and international clientele for asset sales. And he was also very open to the loan from the IMF. So here's a guy who would make a lot of money. The IMF came in and gave a loan to the Ukraine, and he sees the fact that his own personal property rights right now, considering the state of Ukraine, there's no guarantee, and certainly within Russian sphere, there's no guarantee. But under European courts, his property rights would be protected. Not only that, he would have an international base of clients for his asset sales. So that's a lot of what this has to do with the oligarchs in the Ukraine that lean towards the West and the Eurozone. They want a better market for this asset sales. So all the assets they got at the fire sale when they were privatized by ex-communist governments, they built these vast empires, and now they want to sell these assets on a wider scale in the Western market. And there's certain pitfalls with that because a lot of the assets they have can't compete with Western models. For example, the outdated industrial base. But anyway, let me get back to these elites and these billionaires. So he's a pro-Westerner, and then we have Viktor Pinchuk. He's another billionaire, and he's the son-in-law of the former president. And so that's how this works a lot of times. A lot of cronyism, a lot of nepotism, and there's more of that on the other side as well. Poroshenko has said that a trade deal with Europe is, quote, is a way to modernize the country, to fight corruption, the way to have a fair court, freedom of press, and democracy, unquote. And I guarantee you, for the most part, he's not that really concerned with freedom of press and democracy. But he's definitely interested in corruption and a fair court. And so I think he's more interested in cashing in financially than necessarily any kind of democracy movement in Ukraine. And then on the other side, we have a group around the group that is around President Yanukovych. And this group is a lot less visible, a group of wealthy fortunes that are tied to their connections with Russia. And in fact, Yanukovych's son, Alexander, is originally a dentist and somehow has managed to become one of the richest men in the country under his father's regime, with holdings in construction, banking, and coal mining in eastern Ukraine. So he has a lot of connections with the Russians. So no surprise there. And then we also have Dmitry Firtash, another wealthy elite whose fortune was made for being a gas middleman from Russia to Eastern Europe. And he works closely with Gazprom, the Russian monopoly. So those are two sides of the elites that we have in Ukraine struggling against each other. And like I say, they actually may have more sway in what actually happens and which direction Ukraine goes than necessarily the battles in the streets. And these oligarchs have controlled the presidency and political dialogue for the last 3 years, and they want to put off this economic overhaul. That's my understanding. And this is no surprise. This is how we know they're like oligarchs and elites around the world. I guess they want to, both sides of the struggle amongst the oligarchs and elites in Ukraine are interested in putting off any economic overhaul and economic ties with the Eurozone until they have amassed greater wealth. So they're going to position themselves for whatever direction Ukraine eventually goes in. And that's where the real wheeling and dealing is going on in the back rooms in the Ukraine. And then there's more pressure because the Federal Reserve tapering. A lot of the money, hot money, going into emerging markets, some of that was going into the Ukraine. So that's only going to create more pressure on the Ukrainian government right now, as long as this struggle keeps going on. And so there we have it. The other battle that's going on in Ukraine, in the back rooms, wheeling and dealing, the rich elites carving up their pieces of the pie and cashing in on the chaos. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.